So as you're working through this etude, there are a few things that may be more familiar or less familiar that are parts of the building blocks of the etude. One of those things is a flam. There are flams throughout the exercise, and this may be something that you're great with, you totally understand, or maybe something that's completely new to you, or you may just have a real basic understanding of how it works. So I want to take a moment and talk about flams, and then talk about a drag or a rough at the end in the last measure, and show you how similar they are and how they have some of the same mechanics. So when we're playing flams, especially in the first two measures, we're going to play what are called right hand flams. Let's just imagine that there are not these little grace notes, small notes attached. This is what we would play if we just had the first two measures with no grace notes. And then you roll, and we'll talk about rolls in a moment. So if you want to, you can back it up and play that a couple of times and just make sure you have a pretty good idea of what your right hand is supposed to do. Now watch, I start with my stick up. It's mezzo forte, it's a good full stick height, it's a good full dynamic level. So if I play here and I just play that rhythm for the first measure and a half, I'm just playing with legato, fully rebounding strokes. Now my students know that as full strokes, especially when we're talking about full strokes, downstrokes, taps, and upstrokes. What we're going to do to create that little note is we're going to add some taps with it. So our right hand continues doing the same thing, but our left hand is going to be low. And our left hand's job in the first measure and a half sounds like a quiet version of what the right hand was doing. Here's what the left hand does. Now, if I combine those two, my right hand is up and my left hand is low. If I combine them and I try to play at the same time, my left hand should hit before my right hand does. So by allowing the left hand to hit a little bit ahead of the right hand, that's how you start to get that flam sound. And if you think about just moving both hands at the same time, the left hand will automatically hit before the right hand. That is what you want. Can you do that off the left hand? You can, absolutely. You can play the first measure and a half like this. Now, I didn't choose to play these flams where I switched the high stroke from hand to hand. I chose to play all the flams on the right hand except for maybe one little passage where I ended up doing a couple on the left hand. So I chose not to switch my flams, but I want to take a moment and just explain how you would do that for those people who are either not familiar with flams at all or just kind of have a basic understanding. So if we talked about repeated right hand flams being full strokes on the right hand repeatedly and taps on the left, we just get that same result every time. But watch what happens if we choose to have the right hand play a downstroke while having the left hand play an upstroke, okay? We'll start with the right hand up, we'll start with the left hand down, and we're gonna think right hand down, left hand up. Again, if I think move at exactly the same time, the sticks are gonna hit in the correct order, which is the low note's gonna hit first as it should. Now, it should look like the opposite of what you just saw me set up as. My right hand played a downstroke, and so now it's set up for a low stroke, and my left hand played an upstroke. So now it's set up for a high stroke, or a full stroke or a down, depending on what you need it to do. In measure 2, where you have two flams next to each other, you could choose to play it like this, where the flams alternate. Now, everything I did, I was in control of. It was either a downstroke or an upstroke, and those are strokes that have to be controlled, and you don't use the drum's natural tendency to bounce to assist you with that. So that's something to keep in mind. One of the reasons I like to play consecutive flams on the same hand is in effort to try to keep the sticking or the motion relaxed and consistent, and to use the natural rebound of the drum to its advantage. Okay, so that's kind of the two things that you could choose to do with your flams on this. I'm going to toss out one other thing that you might find useful, and this is the third thing that this is the third part of flams that I teach my students. And so what we had was a full flam, which utilizes full strokes. We have a switch flam, or Yeah, we'll call it a switch flam because if you'll notice, the sticks switch sides. The other thing that we didn't really address is a downstroke flam, and that's where one hand is up, the other one is down. This hand plays a downstroke, this one just plays a tap. Downstroke, tap. This is the result. See how that pushes both notes down. When would you want to use that? Well, if you had to play a full forte or mezzo forte sounding flam and then immediately play soft after it, you're going to want your sticks to be down where it's a lot easier to play soft instead of playing with a full flam and then trying to, after you've played it, move that stick really fast. If you can actually do that in the motion of the flam, that makes something like a lot easier. And you can actually see loud and soft because of where the sticks are above the drum. Okay, the next thing is rolls. What am I doing on rolls? So I want you to listen to, let's just do the first line, and I want you to listen to what the rhythm of the rolls are that are appropriate for this speed. Now, we want to go about 80 beats a minute, and that sounds like this on the metronome. Well, I teach all of my students to start their buzz rolls, or actually the double stroke rolls too, with a 16th note bass. At 80 beats a minute, it almost works. So listen, for instance, to the last two measures of line 1, which is measures 5 and 6. This is if I used a 16th note bass. Okay, it kind of works. It fills up the time. It sounds like an okay roll, but the problem with it is because it's a little bit on the slow side, you really hear the sound within that. So it's really easy to hear what speed you're going on the roll. The roll should not have any sort of sound of rhythm within it. Yeah, a roll can be within rhythm, yes, but a roll should not sound like there's a rhythm happening inside of the roll. It should sound like a sustain, like on a woodwind or a brass instrument. So we want to try to pick a roll speed where that's easier to achieve. If I were to go slower, maybe triplets, that becomes really obvious what rhythm I'm using. So we want to make sure that the rhythm does not sound obvious. So there's a couple of things you could do. If 3 notes is too slow, 4 notes is almost there, 5 notes could be a really good solution, or 6 notes could be a really good solution. I'm choosing to play with a sextuplet subdivision, which is 6 16th notes inside of a quarter note. And the last 2 measures of line 1, if I was not playing a roll, would be this roll skeleton. Actually, I think I just played triplets again. So scratch that from the record. Here that is with sextuplets. Now, another reason I like sextuplets there is because everything leads back to the right hand. So it's easy for younger students to feel like they're always leading back to the right hand, especially since so many students are just right-handed. If I wanted to go with 5s, 1 shade slower than that, I could get a really good sounding roll. But the truth is, if you're in any kind of time crunch, you might want to choose a slightly easier option and go with the 6 instead of the 5. Going with a 5-note subdivision on a roll is a really great pursuit, and it is something that you definitely want to be working on in your playing, but it's maybe not what you want to do for this with the amount of time that you may or may not have. So let's listen to what that sounds like first with the roll skeleton with no buzzing, and then again with the buzzing added to the same hand speed. If you want, go back and watch it a couple of times and watch the speed of my hands and see if it's different between the roll skeleton with no buzz, and then if it's the same or different with the buzz. Spoiler alert, it better be the same, right? Or I'm not playing very well. Okay, so let's try it. same speed, now allowing the stick to bounce and buzz. So you can hear that it almost has a frantic sort of speed to it, which leads me to believe that at 80 beats a minute, the 5-note grouping or the quintuplet, a slightly slower speed, would be a really good idea for advanced players. So if you're a 7th grader, you really come by snare drum naturally, and you want to try that, that's a great pursuit. Now you want to spend a little bit of time just working through because it's not one of those automatic rhythms that we just are hardwired to play. Okay, so that's flams, that's rolls. Let's talk about something else that happens in this piece, and then we'll talk about a couple of specifics. Before I get off the roll situation, take a look at measure 8, and actually measure 16. Let's look at measure 16 instead. Measure 16 I like because it gives us some 8th notes to really anchor before we play the roll. Now this roll is shorter length of time than the rolls that we were just doing in half notes, and in fact it's shorter even than the quarter note rolls that we have occasionally through the piece. So when we play this, we're end up playing what's called a single stroke 4 or 3 16th note triplets followed by an 8th note. So right where it has the Z on that 8th note, we're splitting that into 3 notes, not 2, not 4, and that's going to be the same consistent speed as the sextuplets above it. Now, if that went over your head, just trust it, okay? And if that explanation seems like it's really hard to grasp, maybe the actual playing will be easier to do. So let's listen to what it sounds like in measure 16 without the roll. This is just what this hand speed is moving. Okay, do that again. Now if we buzz it, we're going to get a really good sounding buzz roll using that speed. Right? So that's also applicable in the next measure. Measure 16 and 17 sound like this together. And another thing that I really like about using that roll speed and that particular passage is that you start on the right hand and then you end the roll on the left hand, which is exactly the same sticking that you're using on the 8th notes before. So you don't end up flipping your sticking over. That's just an advantage of using that particular rhythm. Okay, I feel like most of the other stuff is easily learned just by counting, being diligent, putting the time in, thinking analytically and logically about it. But I do want to spend a moment addressing 2 things that will definitely be questions for people maybe who are on the younger side of their playing experience. The first one is measure 30. This is the last 2 lines. First of all, that rhythm at the beginning of measure 30 or in measure 30 can be a little bit tricky because you may have not seen 16th rests yet. Well, here's what you want to think for now about this little measure. This is the one that has the 16th rest followed by 3 16th notes. I want you to think about counting it 4 ta theta, 4 ta theta, and then it leads to count 1, 4 ta theta 1. Now, the 16th rest is going to take the place of that 4. So I have my students grunt on the 16th rest to help still feel the space, but not allow it to be an audible motion from the drumsticks. That would be like this, ta theta 1, or without the stick clicks, ta theta 1. That's what's happening. Now, if we're playing right, left on 4 16th notes, and we dropped the first one, we did not have that first right hand, we would play ta ta, which means that sticking would be left, left. That's if you're using a right hand lead system, which is probably what most of you are doing. Now, why am I calling it 4 ta theta? That looks like a measure by itself. Why am I not calling it 1 ta theta? Well, the reality is that little spot with the 16th rest really belongs to the measure 1 line above it. So the measure before it, which is actually measure 30, right? Well, actually, let me see if that works out. 26, 27, 28, 29. So the numbering is a little bit weird. Touch measure 26, which is marked. Touch measure 27, touch measure 28. The next measure is technically measure 29. but when he shifted that last beat down, it was also then called measure 30. That's a little bit confusing, but this is what I want you to think about. In the measure 29, 26, 27, 28, 29, what I want you to think about is that that is a measure that is incomplete, and you have to pick up the fourth beat on the next line. So you would count it like this: 1 ta ta 2 ta ta 3 ta ta 1. And where that was, that's count 4. So try that with me again. 1 ta ta 2 ta ta 3 ta ta 1. And literally that's played like this with accents, which is just going to be a little bit higher reach. We're mezzo piano too, so the sticks are not going to be real high above the drum. Here that is with a metronome. Ready? And. Okay, so that's one thing that always kind of jumps up. If that still doesn't make total sense, go back and watch the performance video a few times, maybe especially at the slower version, just to hear how that works and how those two thoughts are glued together. The very last thing I want to talk about is the last measure. There is one rudiment which we have not had until the last measure. This is called a rough, sometimes it's called a drag. This is really going to be executed very similarly to a flam, or at least that's how I teach it when students are getting started. So what I want you to actually think about is playing the last measure as if it were two flams, and then we're going to build the drag or the rough off of that. Now, in the measure before, you're probably going to use this sticking: right, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Did you notice that the time signature changed and the line above it? Okay, so we only have 2 beats per measure. So you're going to play right, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, which means you're starting the last measure on the right hand. So here's what I want you to try. Play that last measure, right, right, right. And the difference is the first one is without an accent, so it's medium, or you could even say it's kind of low because you're still, you're forte, but you're not an accented forte. Now that's exactly half as fast as it should go, and that's okay. Because in a moment we're going to speed it back up to the actual speed. So try that with me a few times. This is going to be kind of a medium, high, high, and we can let all 3 of those notes be full strokes. Ready? Actually, did you see me use kind of an upstroke motion after the first note? That allows me to be ready to play that accent. So if we're always thinking about motions and we can always identify which is the best motion, we're going to have the easiest time playing through the etudes instead of just kind of having to white knuckle it and just kind of hold on for dear life and just do the best thing. So what I want you to do now is I want you to play the last 2 notes as if they're flams. So that would be this. And that goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the exercise. Remember, we're playing them as quarter notes. In a moment, we're going to speed them back up. And they're going to go twice as fast, and they'll be 1/8 notes. Let's try that a couple more times. Ready? Go. Ready? Go. One more time. Ready? Go. Now, to play the rough, we're going to make one alteration. Instead of playing one low note for the flam, we're going to change it to just doubles. And you can do this strictly by just letting the stick bounce and having it under control. We want to avoid doing this, as that's going to cause some issues and it's not really going to sound like what we want it to. So let's change to this. Right? Try it again. Cool. Again. Ready and go. Now, can you hear that there are 2 little notes preceding that note and then just one on the last one? That's the big difference I want you to hear. So when we play this up to speed, what we're going to end up getting is this. In fact, I've had a lot of students have some success learning those roughs by me referring to them as dirty flams, which is kind of, I don't know, maybe not the greatest official title to give those. But that's kind of one of the ways that you can think about it is it's still a flam motion. There's still a lot of similarities there. However, the dirtiness comes in that it's almost like you allowed another note to accidentally happen. And so it's kind of like an unclean or a dirty execution. If you'll go back and think about how to play that in quarter note slower speed and think about what motions you're using, right hand up, left hand low, it really should help a tremendous amount. Okay, I hope this has been helpful. I hope you do great on your audition music. If you're just looking for something to practice and this is it, I commend you for that. I think that is awesome. I hope you learned something from this and learned something from the etude proper. Okay, thanks. See ya.